This report is the second entry detailing the investigations of the Ordo Theoreticus into the fate of the Forge World Hyacinthum Fenestra. May the light of the Emperor and the Omnissiah be with us all. Insurrection. Hyacinthum Fenestra had long suffered from disruption in its populace, particularly since the exile of its former guardians, the Castellans of the Crimson Star. Their violent civil war left a swathe of destruction upon the world, and it fell to the common people to pay the price of recovery. Whilst worker revolts and labor disputes were a relatively common occurrence, these disruptions had recently begun to follow a concerning pattern. The strategic nature of their targets, the wild-eyed frenzy of their participants, and the increasing genetic deviancy of those captured began to suggest a greater cause than merely mutant uprisings and menial dissatisfaction. In truth, it seems that the gene-stealer cultists left behind by the Castellans had persisted, spreading through the lower levels of the cities and growing their strength in the darkness. Converting much of the planet's criminal underworld and receiving clandestine shipments from their brethren, now their piratical Red Castellans, their attacks slowly grew more bold. By the time the vast stockpile of the war material constructed by Hyacinthum Fenestra was preparing to ship out of the system, these cultists had grown into a sizable army that was scattered all across the world. In perfect synchronity, these cells rose up, attacking strongholds and logistical centers across the planet and in orbit. Although the initial damage was significant, the attacks held little strategic value. Once they had revealed themselves, the cultists became clear targets for the world's defenders and, despite their lack of mutual coordination, the Skitarii maniples and commanderies of Battle Sisters soon responded in force. Chasing their fleeting targets, the Imperials were drawn into the planet's wide wastelands and the twisting mazes of its lower levels. However, this had been precisely the cult's intention. Once sufficiently divided, the Azure Djinn was released into the world's noosphere, triggering mass shutdown across the planet. From what few records indicate, it seems that this data demon works to indulge logic death in any sufficiently advanced machine spirit. This effect worsens with the complexity and power of the machine in question. A simple Auspex scanner would require the reinstallation of its power pack alongside a recitation of the litany of maintenance. But for greater machines, the rites of reawakening are far more complex, often requiring the Azure Djinn to be excised wholly from every aspect of the machine before reactivation can be attempted. With the outbreak of this logic virus, the cultists utterly crippled the defenses of the planet in a single blow. Weapon emplacements, servitors, Skitarii, vehicles and aircraft, even the god machines of the Collegia Titanica, in a blink of an eye they all came to a sudden stop or plummeted to the ground. Long-range communication became impossible as Vox networks were flooded with scrap code and the noosphere utterly collapsed. Across the planet, infrastructure and industry ground to a halt. One city, Forge Festus, is believed to have been lost entirely as the regulators that kept its geothermal vent in check simultaneously failed, leaving the ancient metropolis to slowly sink into a lake of magma. In those cities powered by plasma and nuclear reactors, their great hearts simply died, lights fading and production lines falling silent for the first time in recorded memory. Due to the quantum nature of the noosphere, the infection was spread instantly, reaching the vessels in orbit and even the Forge World's listening posts scattered all across subsector Titus. The quarantine sanction from the Order's jurors is believed to have taken up to 2 days to come into effect, exposing an unknown number of vessels to this deadly data plague and dooming their crew to a cold death in complete darkness. The survivors of this initial strike were in utter disarray. The Battle Sisters found their lines of communication suddenly cut, unable to coordinate, whilst their Skitarii comrades came to an unsettling stillness. Within the planet's capital of Ble Parathero, Canoness Iliana the 52nd found the conclave of Magi unresponsive, their heavily augmented minds crippled by the data djinn. Only the explorators, modified to resist such dangers during their excursions at the expense of higher computing capacity, and the most junior members of the priesthood seemed unaffected. These few remaining tech priests began to dispatch runners, the fast-moving Exploratus Cerberus raiders now being the most mobile forces remaining on the planet, in an effort to gain information and gather their forces back inside the walls of the capital. With their most knowledgeable logisticians now lost, these younger Mechanicus initiates were forced to begin manually inducting hard resets in their kin. Though in time many would be successfully reawoken, the damage to their memories resulted in the loss of thousands of years of collected knowledge and experience. The Azure Djinn had reduced the Forge World's veteran Skitarii legions to a basic manufactorum standard with no noospheric coordination, whilst their vehicles and aircraft remained dormant. With their foes isolated and trapped, the way was opened for the cultists to strike back across the planet. Those forces still able to fight suddenly found themselves alone and surrounded, their former prey tearing through unresponsive vehicles with mining lasers or striking from hidden entrances as cohesion disappeared and gave way to panic. Invasion. As the surface of Hyacinthum Fenestra descended into chaos, its orbital infrastructure fared little better. Within the great ring of steel that constituted the shipyards and loading docks of the world, life support systems failed and light shut down, plunging everything into darkness. For those lucky enough to find torches and vac suits, they would soon discover that the shutdown of electronic systems had completely divided the station. Bulkheads sealed, transport lifts hung frozen on their rails, and shuttle bays sat motionless, leaving the ring utterly isolated from its component sections. The battle sisters aboard the cruiser would have survived the longest, the sealing systems on their power armor protecting them against catastrophic atmospheric loss. From the bridge of the vessel, their sister superior would have watched as an armada of distant ships continued to burn towards the planet. These vessels, now visible as a fleet of corsairs and pirates, passed unchallenged through the kill zone of the ring's defenses and let loose a devastating wave of macro-cannon strikes, tearing through the unshielded structure on the docks and crippling the supply ships anchored within. The first hint that the defenders upon the world had of this attack was when a wave of unguided savior pods crashed into the capital. Containing a handful of sisters and crew members of their cruiser, their warning gave the remnants of the Imperial Command the chance to raise the defenses of the city. From hastily performed reawakening rituals, the Void Dome was activated, though not before several pieces of the ailing station and its docked vessels reduced huge swathes of the metropolis to a burning ruin. From a vantage point atop the High Manufactoria, one explorator seems to have spotted the sisters' cruiser, still relatively intact, crashing into the arid wastes far to the north of the city. From the reports of the far-ranging explorators and returning groups of battle sisters, the invading forces were making targeted strikes across the world, landing dropships and heavy loaders to surround isolated groups of survivors. Studies of the remaining astral debris suggest that the fleet proper had scattered across the system to cannibalize the scores of helpless vessels that now lay dormant, leaving the conquest of the world to their ground forces. As fighting within the city itself escalated, the Imperial units were forced to redouble their defense of strategically vital positions. In particular, the great titans of the Legio Ataris, as immobile as any of the other war machines of the world, had to be secured. To achieve this, the explorators found a truly novel solution. Reactivating tens of thousands of utility grav plates and bolting them to the sternward side of each god engine, the dormant titans were carefully lowered onto their backs through the use of immense forge chains, a maneuver as dangerous as it was ingenious. Then, through the efforts of thousands of Ogryn laborers, organic cities and reawoken servitors, the god machines were literally dragged away from sites of conflict. Some were lost to the crumbling infrastructure of the city, whilst one warlord titan was overrun and dragged away in turn by the invading Genestealer cultists. Still several were secured within the vast assembly vaults of the capital, there to be seen to by the most senior remaining tech priests in a desperate attempt to awaken them. During the scramble for assets, the ground war began in earnest, consisting mostly of bitter conflicts in the wastelands and fighting retreats within the cities. Battle sisters, explorators, and a limited number of reawoken Skitarii forces clashed with the cultists, their more advanced pirate counterparts, and now the towering Night Titans. This was the first confirmation for the defenders that their foe was indeed the Red Castellans, returned to make Hyacinthum Fenestra pay for the old slight upon their honor. Infestation. The state of conflict persisted for 2 months, seeing the Imperials win several strategic victories but being forced back into an ever-shrinking zone of control. It was then that the first Tyranid bioforms began to break atmosphere. Spotted by explorator raiders that ranged far from the major cities, news of their arrival would not reach the capital for nearly 3 days. While some hoped that they would attack the Red Castellans as well, it soon became clear that they too were entirely given over to the Genestealer cult. With this knowledge, the Battle Sisters and Explorators led desperate strikes to recover data vaults containing the knowledge to reawaken the world's more advanced defense systems. The Tech Priests' efforts to reactivate their war machines had slowly begun to bear fruit, beginning with a handful of air and ground vehicles. This allowed the defenders to expand their operational range, giving them the chance to secure vital data from further away, as well as saving isolated groups of survivors. During this time, the Tyranids infested a vast hydroponics facility on the far side of the planet. Gorging on the abundant biomass, it was predicted that their forces would rapidly swell in size, and, even if victory was somehow achieved, the ecologically destitute world would be doomed to a famine soon after. After several months of rapidly escalating conflict, the Sisters and their allies were able to secure a handful of tactical victories, saving fleeing populations, consolidating their control of the capital city, and recovering valuable information to help bring the world's remaining defenses back online. But the news was tightening. Hope for isolated forces around the planet was lost as the Tyranid swarms began to sweep across cities and strongholds. Soon, no more forays were possible, and a protracted siege of the capital seemed inevitable. With the looming possibility of a slow, starved death trapped within the city walls, a counter-assault was planned. Their target was the crash site of the Battle Sisters cruiser, where a significant store of armaments, supplies, and even some survivors were believed to be. The site was deep in enemy territory, with the wide wasteland plains, twisting gorges, and broken mountain peaks infested by Tyranid bioforms standing between them. The attack itself would doubtlessly draw in enemy forces from further afield, pulling their foe into a series of decisive conflicts. The Imperials expected to face heavy resistance from the Tyranid swarm, the cultists and the knights, with the Magi and their patriarch likely making their presence known. There was even a chance that the enemy, with a greater understanding of the Azure Jinn, had been able to reawaken their captured warlord Titan. The assault force would consist of remaining Battle Sisters, the most advanced Skitarii that could be spared from the capital, the Explorators, and a handful of reawoken Titans. Whilst a successful capture of these supplies would greatly increase their chances of survival and deal a severe blow to the enemy, failure would leave the capital exposed, sealing the fate of the last Imperial citizens upon the world. It was a desperate plan, but, stretched to the very limits of mental and physical endurance, it was the only plan the defenders had left.